kiddos. Happy Friday. I think I might post some read alouds next week, just in case, not required, but in case anyone's interested in listening. But for some of us, this may be like the very last time we do read aloud for the year. So I wanted to pick something that had kind of a goodbye message. And so I thought this was the perfect one. A lot of you probably know The Kissing Hand. It's a really popular children's book. And so this is the sequel. You don't have to know the first one to understand this one, but they are related. So we're going to read this today. There's a lot of intro pages, so we'll just kind of fly through those ones. Okay. Chester Raccoon sat in the corner of his tree hollow and frowned. I'm not moving, he announced stubbornly. I'm staying here. I want to stay with my tree and stay with my friends and stay where I've always lived. Mrs. Raccoon patted Chester's worried, furrowed forehead. I understand how you feel, she told him in an understanding, motherly voice. But I'm afraid we all have to move. But I like it here, whined Chester. It's my home. It's my home too, said Mrs. Raccoon, and Ronnie's. And I know how scary it is to move to a new place. But sometimes, like when you started school and changed classes, you have to do things that are scary. And at first, and it are scary and hard at first. I know. Maybe you could think of moving as an adventure. Chester scrunched up his face and grumbled. I don't like adventures. I had an adventure down at the pond and fell in chasing a frog. I had an adventure up in a pine tree and got prickly pine cones in my tail. I had an adventure in Red Rock Cave and got smacked by a bat. Mrs. Raccoon laughed. Well, this will be a different kind of adventure. This time we'll all be together, you, me, and Ronnie. Chester didn't budge. He just sat there with his arms folded and a stubborn expression on his face. Why do we have to leave our tree anyway? He wanted to know. I like this tree. I'm used to it. A line has been drawn around the trunk, explained Mrs. Raccoon. Soon the cutters will come and cut it down for wood. Chester poked his head out of the hollow and looked around. There are lots of other trees, he pointed out. Why don't they cut down some of the other trees instead? They're cutting down all of the trees in this part of the woods, explained his mother. But I've picked out a new tree to live in that's big and comfortable and has lots of holes to look out of. Chester sat back down and looked thoughtful. What if I don't leave? What if I just sit here and never leave this tree again as long as I live? Will they cut it down? I'm afraid they would, said Mrs. Raccoon. But you know, moving isn't so bad. I moved a lot of times. It's hard at first, but you make new friends and fix up your new tree just the way you like it. Besides, don't you think you'll get a little lonely if you stay here? The deer are moving, and the squirrels, and so are the skunks and the foxes. Don't you want to stay with your family? Will I have to go to a new school? Asked Chester. I suppose you will, but you never know who you might meet. Don't you want to make new friends? I like the friends I already have. I don't need to make new ones. I see. Well, I certainly will miss you if you stayed here, said Mrs. Raccoon. Aren't you afraid you'd miss us? I'd miss you, admitted Chester. I'm not so sure about Ronnie. Mrs. Raccoon chuckled. I think you'd miss Ronnie most of all. Who would be there to tickle your tail? Who would be there to pull your tail or tickle your mask or follow you everywhere you went? Chester sat back and took a good long look around the inside of this hollow. He memorized its round shape with its lookout holes just below the thick branches that housed bird nests and squirrels. Then he closed his eyes, pressed his palms to the wall, and felt the texture of the wood and the bark, the smooth places and the rough places. And when he opened his eyes, he reached up and he broke off a small piece of broken bark from the wall and pushed it deep in his pocket. He put his face up close to the wall and breathed in the sweet scent of white oak. Next, he gazed out the window. He wanted to always remember how it had looked, the way the stars and the moon shone between the branches, and the way the afternoon hit the leaves, turning them a fiery red in the fall. When he ducked his head back into the tree, he placed a gentle kiss on his palm and pushed it against the wall. Goodbye, he told the hollow. I will miss you. When Chester climbed outside, he wrapped his little arms around the tree trunk and he said goodbye again. This time, a tiny tear rolled down his cheek. Mrs. Raccoon led Chester and Ronnie down the path the other animals had taken to the far end of the distant woods, where they would soon be living. You know, Mrs. Raccoon told Chester, you don't ever have to forget your tree. You can keep it in your head and your heart forever, just like it is today. Chester stayed quiet all the way to the far end of the distant woods. When he arrived at his new tree in the morning, he folded his arms and pouted. Mrs. Raccoon nuzzled him on the ear. Why don't we all go inside and see how we like it? Chester followed his mother and brother into the tree hollow and looked around. He reached into his pocket and fingered the small piece of bark he'd brought with him. It felt good having a piece of his old home. What do you think? Asked Mrs. Raccoon. It's okay, said Chester. Ronnie looked up at his big brother, saw that he was sad, and climbed into his lap. Reaching up, he pulled Chester's whiskers and tickled him under the arm. Chester couldn't help but giggle. I miss my tree, he told Ronnie. I do too, came a sweet voice from outside. Chester's ears perked up, and he popped his head out of the hollow. There, standing at the foot of the tree, was a young raccoon just about his age. Hi, I'm Cassie, said the young raccoon. Who are you? Chester ducked back down into the hollow and brushed back his ruffled black mask. When he popped his head back out, Cassie was still there. I'm Chester, he said shyly. Do you live here? I do now, says Cassie. Chester left Ronnie with his mother, climbed out of the tree, and stood beside the pretty raccoon. His tiny pink cheeks climbed into a wide smile. Mrs. Raccoon peeked out at the tree and grinned. Placing a kiss on her palm, she showed it to Chester and told him to go play. Chester kissed the center of his palm and turned it toward his mother. All right, he told her. I'll stay. And that's the end. So I think it's just a sweet story, and I think it kind of sums up, how I feel that I'm sad you guys are going to 8th grade, but I know that it's a natural thing and a good thing for you guys to grow and get new teachers and to have turns with new people. But I'm going to miss you guys, and so I think this book kind of sums up the way I'm feeling today, and it's always at the end of the year.